To blip or not to blip? That is the question.
So what's the topic that we're going to talk about?
Throttle matching, or rev matching.
Rev matching really is to balance where you want the engine revs to be from when you pull the clutch in to letting the clutch out. When you're changing down, generally speaking, unless you've got a blipper, you need to disengage the gearbox, so you have to pull the clutch in. The second you pull the clutch in, that breaks the transmission train. Even if you do it quickly, you're going to lose revs, and then you've got to get the clutch back home, engage the gearbox back again, and that bring the revs back up. And it's that bringing it back up which is the problem. It's to help smooth out the rush of engine braking.
Why is it important?
It helps to keep the bike stable under braking.
So who would get most benefit from using matching engine revs and blipping on a bike that doesn't have an auto blipper attached?
Well, the big bikes which benefit, or the bigger group bikes which benefit from it, are bikes, bigger 4-strokes, twins, triples, anything which has got a relatively large capacity. Certainly anything which hasn't got a slipper clutch.
Well, effectively, if you do it wrong, you can increase the engine braking too much, and it can cause the rear wheel to start hopping and jumping. Of course, when you brake hard, the majority of weight goes onto the front wheel. The back wheel becomes light, so the amount of grip it's got starts to fall away. So if you all of a sudden dramatically increase the engine braking by downshifting at the wrong time or doing it wrong, it's effectively like stamping on the back brake. It's generally not a good idea. So the idea is to rev match, so that the engine's RPM matches its road speed. So it can decelerate smoother than letting the revs drop off and then making the back wheel effectively drag the engine back up to speed. You hear the revs can be kind of drop off and then they come back and drop off and come back. That coming back of the engine RPM is effectively over braking the back wheel, and if you're on the edge of grip, it can often cause the back wheel to start to tremor going into the corner, which freaks the rider out, because all of a sudden for him the bike's juddering about on the brakes. Where if you blip the throttle in between the downshifts, you increase the engine revs higher than where they really need to be, but it allows a smoother transition when you do let the clutch out, so the engine revs to road speed are more matched. So it's kind of a smoother transition, where if you downshift by pulling the clutch in, let the revs drop off, dump the clutch, and then the engine revs have to come back up, it's like just pressing hard on the back brake when that happens, until the engine revs get back up to, as it were, the matched RPM. So it's really important. It might seem trivial and unnecessary, but you have to ask yourself, why do the vast majority of bikes now come with blippers? And that's to help smooth that transition out. Well, to draw a graph and make it mean something, essentially you're talking about deceleration, which is a curve dropping away, and then you've got to put a blip of throttle into it, but trying to create something visually which is kind of real time is fairly difficult. Well, to listen to it on a soundtrack is obviously the best, but basically when the engine revs are dropping off, it's fairly constant, so you've got a revs going ba, kind of dropping off, and then a blip of throttle is ba, bum ba, bum ba, and it's just a little blip in the revs while you do the gear change, but being positive with the revs, making the engine do the work. Where the opposite of that is essentially pulling the clutch in, changing gear with the throttle closed, and so the second you pull the clutch in, the revs go bow and kind of drop off, and then they have to be kind of picked up back to where they should be or where they need to be by the wheel doing the work. So the wheel has to find the extra bit of grip to kind of pull the revs back up to where they need to be. Where when you pull the clutch in and blip the throttle, the engine is kind of, or the bike is kind of almost freewheeling for that small space in time.
engine revs are kind of back where they need to be, so the actual start again of the deceleration is much smoother. It's basically about trying to keep the bike stable in the transition of braking whilst changing gears at a suitable time. But it's the downshift which is still an issue with a lot of bikes. I mean, most of the modern superbikes come with blippers, which kind of do it for you, and as long as you remember to keep the throttle closed and not go like analog and blip the throttle, which can sometimes confuse the blipper. But basically, with the auto blipper, you just keep the throttle closed and just downshift, and it will blip absolutely perfectly. I can't live without it now. Okay, let's try and put it into some sort of visualization. Imagine you're trying to keep the RPM relatively constant, in the sense that it's a slowly easing off sort of RPM. So the ideal is we're trying to keep it along that line. So if you physically blip the throttle as the engine revs are dropping off, essentially what you're going to do is part of the way down there is actually blip the engine revs to the higher than they need to be, and then you're back to square one. So all this section is deceleration, engine braking. The up section there is the actual blip, and then you let the clutch back out again, and then the engine braking kind of takes back over again, and it's that kind of smooth transition. Now, what I'm trying to highlight to people is if they shut the throttle, pull the clutch in without the blip, the second you pull the clutch in, even if it's only for a short space of time, essentially what happens is the revs drop off, and then the back wheel has to grip and then bring the engine back up to speed. So essentially this hole that you're having to fill in, because while that's happening, this again is as per normal, it's the same as this part, it's normal engine braking. But this bit here, this ramp up to get the revs back up there, that is the problem, because you're going from a lower revs to a higher revs to get to where you need to be, as opposed to a higher revs to a lower revs, which is easier to flatten out.
And is that when the bike starts juddering, when you let the clutch out?
The judder will usually start right as you let the clutch out there, because essentially the tyre has to grip that extra bit more and pull the revs back up. Which let's face it, if you're braking really hard into a corner, so most of the weight's on the front wheel, the back wheel's kind of scrabbling for grip as it is. So if you overload that by dumping the clutch, even if you do it really quickly, you're making the tyre work harder than it needs to and drag the engine up. So that little blip of throttle, it's not a big handful, it's just a little squeeze of throttle, a little quick squeeze of throttle, just as you dip the clutch. And that creates that shape, so the transition's smoother than this engine being have to be dragged back up to speed. What we're trying to do is ideally is seamlessly down change. Now the slipper clutches, the advantage of slipper clutches, a proper race slipper clutch, will have is potentially is you can shut the throttle and you'll get a set amount of engine braking, and you can shift from sixth straight through to first gear practically, and it will still give, relatively speaking, the same amount of engine braking. The downside to that, of course, is you don't really know unless you've counted the gears, so you know exactly what gear you're in. Is it the right gear or not? Because while the slipper clutch is engaged, essentially the slipper clutch is working, but the gearbox is sort of semi-disengaged. So it's not until you pick the throttle up or open the throttle again that the clutch kind of re-bites, re-grips, and then it has to find where it actually is in the rev range. Now if you've gone down too many gears, the thing screams its head off, or you're in the wrong gear. So with the race slipper clutches, you have to be really careful in the sense that you don't go down too many gears or you lose count of where you are. So this is kind of where rhythm comes into it. But for the vast majority of bikes, the little blipper throttle really works. And older stuff, twins, big stuff, particularly stuff without any form of slipper clutch, you really do need to sort of manage this very, very carefully. Two strokes, it's less of an issue because there's virtually no there is a tiny bit, but there's virtually no engine braking at all, so it's not as relevant. But with the four strokes, that little blip smooths the transition out. Without the blip, you've got that this is where the bike will struggle with where the rear wheel will start to patter if you're not careful. If you're driving along at 10,000 RPM, you pull a clutch in, the motor goes, whoop, will just go to tick over. And then you let the clutch back out again, it goes, whoa, it has to drag it back up to speed. And it's that dragging it back up to speed, which is that bit, the ramp up.
To get the revs back up again.
So the down bit on the brown on the left,
That one.
that is coasting.
Basically between there and there, that whole section is coasting. I've exaggerated it like that. It's more like that. It's a very short period of time. I'm just trying to get this bit. It's the bringing it back up as opposed to letting the engine revs are high and they're dropping off. That's better than low and having to come back up again. That is stressful for a tyre to deal with. That isn't.
Well, the actual action of it is during the braking is to be braking, whether you're 2 fingers, 4 fingers like I tend to brake. And it's essentially, all you really need to do is maintain a constant brake. And you can utilise your thumb more than anything else. And it's just like a little twist. You don't have to give it big handfuls, that's not the way to do it. So it's brake and blip the throttle at the same time. Just little small blips. Obviously, it's not a sequential thing when you're changing gear, like throttle off, clutch in, change gear, clutch out, throttle back on. You need to do them absolutely at the same time so they're completely matched.